I feel like I have a couple of things to talk about just because I've got tons of notes here, so let's go ahead and talk about this. I've got like three things that are all in the talk about first category, so forgive me as I just kind of launch into this. Number one, I'm going to go ahead and admit something that I know is kind of a contentious opinion among Star Trek fans. Go ahead and fling your stones and kill me with sticks. It's okay. I understand. I actually kind of like this episode, in all honesty. I mean, it's silly and stupid and has some really serious plot problems, which I'll be talking about later. But I like this episode. And I think it's kind of the cloud effect. The very next point I have here is the name of a gentleman whose name is David Livingston. I hope if you are a good Trek fan, I said that wrong. Not if you're a good Trek fan. Good Trek fan. No, I mean, if you're a Trek fan of good Trek, in other words, you are a fan of good Trek, that's what I meant by that, you probably recognize that name. That is the name of the director of this episode. He has directed many other episodes. I wrote down a couple of quick examples. The Cloud, which despite being stupid was very well directed. Inter Arma Enim Silent Leges, which I kind of scribbled, but anyways, that great DS9 episode. The Die is Cast, another great DS9 episode. Scorpion, arguably the best episode of Voyager. He has done dozens upon dozens of episodes of DS9 and Voyager. He's a great director. He does great work. And it's really obvious in the way he presents himself. The scenes on the boardwalk, well, it's not actually the boardwalk, but the scenes that were supposed to be out on the boardwalk were amazingly well directed. People getting their cues right, camera at just the right angle so people interacting with the dialogues, did so smoothly and without any real feeling like it was artificial. Very good job on that. But let's go ahead and talk about a few things. The eugenics wars are supposed to be happening basically right now. This episode occurs during 1996. Spoiler alert, by the way. So, yeah, by the way, it's a time travel episode. Fun little side note, did you know Voyager actually has the most time travel episodes of all the series, even more than the original series? Although that can be debated because of technicalities, but we're not going to get into that. Point being, this is a time travel episode. They go to 1996. The eugenics wars are supposed to be happening. This is kind of indicative of the mentality that goes into Voyager, both the good side of it and the bad side of it. There were two minds, two thought processes going on behind the scenes of the producers and executors of this episode and of Voyager in general when they did this. They wanted to set it in the modern era, which at this point in time was 1996. So they're like, okay, how do we do this? Well, some people thought carefully and thought, well, maybe we'll do just tiny little hints of the eugenics wars, because we don't actually want it to bog down the plot. Any story happening that time probably should be centered around the wars, but we don't want it to be. So maybe have it be like in the news in the background. Maybe it'll be on a newspaper, and just mention it in brief. The fans will know what it is, and everyone else will just assume it's some made-up news broadcast. Okay, that's a good approach, and it makes a lot of sense, and especially given the fact that actually showing the eugenics wars is probably outside of the budget of Voyager, especially at the time. Then there's the other mentality in the producers, which was, screw it, we just want to set it in the now and do whatever. I forget the exact quote, forgive me, but it was basically, let's just do whatever and to hell with it. Forgive me for appearing to fanboy out a bit here and showing my Trek blood, but the eugenics wars is a fairly significant and relevant point in time in Star Trek history. Arguably one of the most important times prior to the Cochrane and Vulcan meeting itself. It's completely bypassing it as if it never existed is not good. Doing so for the sake of just, screw it, nobody cares anyways, less good. But whatever. One other thing to talk about. Originally, this episode was going to be a four-parter. Yes, a four-parter. If you're paying attention, there's never actually been a four-parter on Star Trek. There's actually never really been in a three-parter. There are some storylines that have story arcs that cross multiple episodes, but never an actual three-parter or four-parter. It's never actually gone above two. The executives at Paramount, aka the people who, or I guess it wasn't actually Paramount, but the point being, the actual executives above them, above these executives, shot that down completely because the idea of doing something other than a two-parter was just blasphemy. Oh, that'll never work. God, I feel like slapping these people sometimes. Regardless, they chopped it down to 3 episodes, and then they chopped it down to 2. And they were doing some significant work on this. Originally, this was actually going to be the season cliffhanger, and then, the season opener for season 3. That was shoved back to make room for Basics. Whether that's a good thing or not is debatable, but as I already kind of discussed, Basics was kind of a resetting of the status quo of Voyager, which is why that got that slot. That whole condensed from 4 into 2 thing, that'll be more significant in Part 2. For the most part, Part 1 is exactly how the original Part 1 was going to be. It actually has really good pace. It never really loses its energy. It never feels condensed or rushed, but at the same time, it feels like a lot of ground is being covered under the short period of time. And yeah, I was actually really impressed with it. I really like this episode, if that's not obvious. Let's go ahead and talk about... these episodes are very inconsistent. I've just mentioned the eugenics war thing, which is arguably the biggest point. But the actual plot of the episode doesn't actually make any sense. I'm going to go and spoil the ending for you here, because, whatever. They're here because there's a temporal explosion in the 29th century in the Sol system, which destroyed the Sol system. So a time agent of the time sees that, determines that there's debris from a ship from the 24th century here, and immediately leaps to the conclusion that that's what causes it. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So then he goes back, tries to destroy Voyager, fails, goes back even further, then they get the time ship, go to the future, and cause the destruction, right? That's not what actually happens. Instead, they go to the future, and for some reason, even though all this stuff has already happened, I can't even explain this. They're completely self-inconsistent with their time travel. Now, granted, Star Trek as a whole is very inconsistent with its own time travel, but for an individual episode to be like that is a little strange, because what happens is they go to stop him, and oh my god, and then they stop him! So the explosion never happens, but they're still in the past. But it's okay, because a time ship shows up from another timeline that they just created by their actions to take them back to their presence with all, not only with full memory of what's happened, but full memory of all the changes that have already been done caused by the event that never happened. And again, some forms of time travel work this way, but most don't, and it's just, again, it's breaking its own rules within the episode. I don't want to get too much into temporal mechanics, but ugh. It's strange, though, because despite the inconsistency, and there are several inconsistent things in this episode, I made a couple notes as we go, they do a lot of things really interestingly. 2 really big things started with Future's End. Number 1 is the concept of the time ships and the temporal prime directive and all that stuff. The idea that there is a group of individuals in Starfleet in the future who are specifically monitoring time actually makes a fairly large amount of sense when you think about it. And it wouldn't even be that surprising as to why we haven't really encountered them yet, because that means they've been doing their jobs properly. It also, brilliantly, although they never actually use it this way, can be used as a retroactive way to make all of the inconsistencies in time travel in the past make sense. That being said, the other thing they did was ruddy brilliant. One of the things, I will definitely give, I believe Brandon Braga specifically deserves credit for this. I will definitely give the man, or whoever actually gets the credit for this, tons of credit for looking at the Doctor. And the Doctor is, let's face it, arguably the best character on the show. I like several characters on Voyager, I do. But by and large, the Doctor is the best character, and the main reason why is because he had a character arc. He actually grew and developed across the series. Even in Season 3, the season of no continuity past episodes, he's going to have continuity, starting in Future's End. Now, this actually isn't really a thing until Episode 2, and I'll talk about it more there. But the fact that they bothered to think about that problem and came up with a solution to it in a way that completely makes sense was awesome. So, I just wanted to gush about that. Now, let's talk about the bad guy. I forget the name of the actor. He was a fairly well-known environmentalist. at the time, especially in Hollywood. And he he had been approached about the idea, or had approached about the idea of acting on Star Trek more than once in the past. Usually the idea of playing a good guy, because that's kind of how he saw himself. So he was approached to play this guy. Now, again, call this a contentious opinion, but I like his portrayal of Sterling, I believe was his name, the Sterling, the villain, because okay, there's no getting around this. He plays it like a Captain Planet villain. He plays it completely over the top, and basically a very stereotypical example of stupid evil, despite the fact that everything about the story tries to emphasize that his character is incredibly smart, very long-term thinking, generally a genius-level intellect, all that kind of stuff, right? But he portrays him as someone who is almost criminally stupid in his evil, like over the top, right? Well, there's certain reasons for that, and I don't want to get into the politics of the situation, but I still like his portrayal because he did a good job of it, I think. Now, granted, whether or not he should have been comically evil or not is debatable, but he does a good job of comically evil. You see where I'm going with this? And I actually have a reason for this, and I want to talk about this briefly. Most people don't understand what the difference is between a desire and a fantasy. I have talked about this many times in the past, but to really summarize this, a fantasy is something you don't actually want. It's something that's nice to think about or to emulate, but you don't actually want it, right? How many people out there actually want to be in the middle of World War II shooting people and suffering and dying of a wound that you got 3 days ago that you didn't even notice because of the adrenaline that's pumping through you? How many people actually want to be in the middle of a post-apocalyptic future barely surviving and blah, blah, blah? You know, I could give 1,000 examples. You get the idea. It is a fantasy. We are not actually experiencing it. We are experiencing it through layers, through filters. That's the whole romanticization thing. I've talked about that too. The point being, most people don't actually want to be evil, horrible people. Even actors don't. And yet there is something enjoyable about playing a villain, or more accurately, about playing a bad guy. It's because it's just fun. You're just letting loose and having fun with it. And of course you're not actually going to do one of these horrible things. And you're not actually this horrible person. How many times in my streams have I been asked to play Kefka? Kefka, for God's sakes. And I love playing Kefka. It's tons of fun. I could never do that for real, because it's a fantasy, not an actual desire. I don't actually want to be someone who is so deranged and lost inside his own broken sense of self and worth that he literally tries to destroy everything around him because it doesn't deserve to exist, given the fact that it birthed him. I mean, really, right? But it's fun to play a bad guy. And I stress the way I put that. Not a villain, not someone who is evil. There are several horrible, depraved, disgusting things that people can and have done to each other in real life and in fiction. Portraying those kind of villains, you usually don't hear about the actors really praising those roles. Usually what you hear about the actors is how difficult it was to get into the character for that. How good the actor was. You'll hear from other people how good that actor was to portray someone that horrible because of how hard it was to do that. By contrast, you have someone who's playing a bad guy. They love those roles. They're just like, yeah, it was fun to just cut loose and have fun with it, to ham it up and really enjoy the role, because they're just a bad guy. And again, it's funny because that is in itself that romanticization. Most people, even actors who want to play, villains, antagonists, don't want to play those kind of horrific, terrifying people. They want to portray a bad guy, someone who's the villain, someone who is doing wide, sweeping, generalized, romanticized acts of bad, rather than actually doing anything horrible. And so our good friend who played Sterling here, he loved it. He praises this role constantly. The other people praise him for his role too, but he loved portraying this character. He was actually like, yeah, this was great. I got to run around and just be horrifically evil, and it was tons of fun, It's fun to do that kind of a thing. And I feel like, I've always felt that when an actor genuinely enjoys a role, the performance tends to be more enjoyable, at least for me. And so that's pretty much my explanation as to why I actually like his portrayal of Sterling. Let's talk about... We'll save that for later, actually. Let's talk about technobabble. Okay, we're done talking about technobabble. Seriously, I'm just going to make a brief point here. The technobabble of the scene where they're fighting Braxton's ship completely saps any of the energy of that scene. The whole episode had some good energy. The whole episode had some good drama and really felt like the threat was imminent. The only exception to that intro scene where this ship comes from the future and starts destroying them. Oh my god! Inverse the quantum tachyon mega infrared pulse. So it'll. Oh, okay, everything's fine now. Oh god, he's hitting us again! Distribute a distant tachyon nadion beam across our deflector dish! Okay, we're fine again. It just completely destroys any sense of drama in that scene. That being said, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and leap forward to this. We need to talk about Captain Braxton. He'll actually show up later, portrayed by a different actor. But Janeway has a line I really like, and I actually wrote it down here. I won't sacrifice my ship and crew over a 10-second conversation. Yeah, I'm with that. I wouldn't either. I don't think Picard would either. Or Kirk. Or Sisko. Archer might. But none of the good captains would actually look at that and say, okay, all right, just go ahead and kill us then. No, that's retarded. And I stress that because it emphasizes how stupid Braxton really is. The episode, I feel, missed... Okay. There's only two ways to interpret Braxton, really. Either this is an incredibly cynical view of just how bad things are going to get in the future, or he went insane. Let's look at the insane option first, because this is what I actually felt for the longest time was true. What I assumed was true for forever until I rewatched the episode and analyzed it and showed that there is zero evidence ever given of his insanity, other than the events I'm about to tell you. I'm saying that wrong. There's plenty of evidence. But the episode never tries to just make you think that. The episode never portrays it. They just portray him as a captain who had to do something incredibly stupid because the needs of the plot demanded it. And that's how it always felt. How many times has this happened? We need something dumb to happen so we can get to the episode. So here's something dumb. I mean, I was just dulled to it by this point. But think about Braxton's actions. He sees the entire Sol system destroyed. I don't even remember how many people there are because there's people in colonies other than just Earth in the future. Hell, even in the Star Trek era future. So by the 29th century, that is in the dozens of billions of people who have just been extinguished in a moment. So Braxton probably goes completely nuts, loses his mind, starts to obsess over the situation. How many days or weeks or months did he spend scouring that system for any scrap of any information he could find to try and prevent this horrible accident from happening? After all, he was a captain on a time ship. Except for some reason his time ship is a shuttlecraft, but whatever, moving along. And so he finds wreckage from Voyager, researches it, figures it out, and decides, aha, goes back, finds Voyager in the wrong quadrant, and goes to destroy them, because of course he does, because he's insane, because he's crazed. Watch the beginning of the episode again. It really makes a lot of sense. They're trying to talk to him, and he insists. He tries to explain what's happening in a rushed and hurried tone, and when they say, I need some evidence, he says, no time! Terminates the thing and attacks them again. That's not the actions of a sane starship captain, let alone a Starfleet captain. And then, of course, he becomes a raving hobo. Literally raving and literally hobo. A homeless man in Los Angeles, who is somehow still alive, who has been following Sterling for decades and has nothing to his name of worth or point other than the fact that he keeps preaching that the end of the world is coming. Point 2. The future is much more cynical than we thought. I just feel like pointing out something here really quick. Why did Braxton never try to integrate himself into this society? Now I know what you're going to say, and there's plenty of reasons why he might not have. Such as, for example, he's insane. That's a pretty good reason why he wouldn't have integrated. Or the second reason, which I'm leading up to. But how many times in the future have people from the future come to integrate into the past and have figured out a way to do so, even if it took them time? For God's sakes, the Vulcans pulled that off in that one episode of Enterprise whose name I can't think of. The Vulcans managed to integrate themselves into a local society in the 50s. And he can't manage it in the mid to late 90s? Granted, 60s to 90s, 30 years, but still. One of the lines I'm reminded of is in First Contact, where they were planning on self-destructing the Enterprise, and they had orders to find a quiet part of America and stay out of history's way. The implication being that they would just kind of live their quiet, simple lives and not really, think about the future or anything, because they accomplished their duty in saving the future, and now they were going to save the future again by staying out of its way, by quietly integrating into it, not making waves. It's not that hard. I mean, really, it isn't. It sucks, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And he was a captain. Forgive me for having slightly more stringent requirements upon my Starfleet captains than raving hobo. But I'm getting to that second point. And that second point is the future is incredibly cynical, or perhaps markedly, we are incredibly cynical of the future, because the future is so jaded and, I guess the word I'm looking for is zealous, that they would do such horrible and terrible things automatically because it would be assumed that that's... Okay. Picture it like this. Braxton comes back, tries to destroy Voyager. Is actually kind of surprised Voyager resists him. He explains his reasoning. They say, no, we can't do this, and he shuts them up and tries to destroy them again. Now, I mentioned it's really obvious to see why that would happen from an insane person, but picture it from someone who is accustomed to an entire society that doesn't question, that doesn't really think for themselves, that just automatically accepts what happens because it's what's happening. It's what authority says to do. It's what is acceptable for the greater good. Kind of a post-apocalyptic kind of a situation if you're thinking about it, or a 1942 situation if you're thinking about it, depending on how you look at it, or not 1982? I can never think of the name of that damn book. Point being, a rather bleak and dystopian, that's the word I'm looking for, a rather bleak and dystopian look at it, that kind of a future. Then look at the fact that he refused to integrate with the past and constantly rambles about how stupid they are, and how primitive they are, and how ridiculous they are, and how pathetic they are, blah, 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 blah. Because this individual who is used to that kind of near uniform totalitarian society now has to exist within 60s America, and 70s America, and 80s America, and 90s America. And so he suddenly finds himself in close to the opposite of the kind of society he's used to. And his mind can't withstand that because he has been programmed all his life, probably since birth, to believe that the way they do things in the future is true, correct, proper. And so he refuses to lower himself towards integrating with society because that's not how society is supposed to work. And that's why he degrades so far. That's why he rambles the way he does. That's why he is basically a wreck in the present or future, whatever you want to think of that. Neither one of these things paint a particularly good portrait of the future, I'll admit. But take whichever one you think works better for you. That's all up to you. I have a little note here. This will come in more in episode 2. I'm only going to mention it briefly, but as I mentioned earlier, Sterling is a surprisingly intelligent villain for someone who's so damn stupid. He makes so many incredibly blatant, obvious mistakes throughout these 2 episodes. And you could say it's because he's arrogant, and that's certainly true, but man, he's an idiot. And yet, for all his idiocy, he did a lot of things that intelligent people with access to his situation would do. He prepared for when people from the future would come. He prepared to be able to... He put money and information and data aside to be ready for them when they happened. To establish himself in his own little pocket of empire and power and money and influence so that he could have the things such as a holographic projector or a launch bay within his own thing, all sorts of things that he has access to. He actually has scanning and shielding equipment to prevent scanning set up around his office just in case they take him by surprise. Now, granted, a lot of that is an aspect of his paranoia, which again will come in more in episode 2, but God, he makes so many stupid decisions. He almost comes across as a Mary Sue, but I'll be talking about that more later. One other thing I want to mention up here. There's a really funny gag that I know a lot of people missed. I just want to point it out if you watch this episode. It's just after Rain, that's her name. Rain sends the message up to Voyager, and then Voyager contacts the crew down below in order to inform them that they've been spotted and send Tuvok and Tom Paris off to the observatory, Griffith Observatory. I've actually been there. It's a cool place. So the column beeps, and several people are walking by the camera at the time, and every single one of them goes for their cell phone simultaneously and pulls it out. And you can hear in the background, if you're listening, hello? Hello? It's just a nice little gag. Tiny little thing. That's the kind of stuff David Livingston's really good at. Anyways, I have a question for you. Why is the henchman, who I don't actually remember if he's ever given a name, I think he is, but why is that henchman so loyal to Sterling? Now, from a purely literary perspective, it makes sense why he is. He is the dragon. He is the individual who is, Sterling's number one. He's the front man. He does the actual work. Sterling does the actual, the behind-the-scenes stuff. In other words, this is a typical relationship between someone who has personal power and someone who has political power. Sterling and the henchman in this case, right? And there are many reasons for this to exist, for this coexistence to happen. What I don't understand is why he is so loyal to a fault throughout the entire thing unto his own death, while still being rather sadistic and more than willing to try and, among other things, vaporize an entire car in broad daylight with a weapon he's probably only barely practiced with. By the way, side note before I go on, I like the fact that Tuvok was able to outshoot the guy, because he should be able to. He's Tuvok, a security officer who trains regularly and should have a better aim than some dude who's probably only shot that gun twice before, so props for that. Kim has a really badly written line, and I'm just going to mention it in brief, because it's only done to kind of shove a joke into the episode. Whether you find the joke funny or not, that's just irrelevant. I admittedly do find the joke funny. The joke is that Neelix and Kes find themselves enjoying a soap opera. Okay, I'm with that, haha, etc. Like I said, it made me grin. What I don't get is Kim's line. Forgive me for quoting it inaccurately, but it was basically, I can't imagine simply watching a story and not being part of it. They have non-interactive entertainment in the future. We've seen it many, many times. Even on the holodeck, they have non-interactive entertainment in the future. They have books in the future, on paper. And I just feel like pointing out, because it's such a ham-fisted line. It's another example of, here, we need to shove this in there to make the joke happen. But, anyways. 3 last points here, then I'm going to go ahead and stop this time. I'm reminded of the episode A Matter of Time, which is an episode I actually really enjoy in TNG. If you haven't watched it, in brief, that's the one where a person from the past took a time ship from someone from the future and figured out how to get it to work and went to the future in order to invent things in the past. This sounds familiar, I'm sure. No actual mention of A Matter of Time was made in anything that I read about the behind-the-scenes production of Future's End. Not that I'm saying there was any intentional plagiarism or copying. Not at that. It's just interesting that the two stories are so congruent, because the very idea is fascinating, isn't it? The idea is that someone from the future was so arrogant and so presumptive that an intelligent, skillful, willful person from the past is able to overpower them and then use the tools that the people in the future have to their advantage. And it's an interesting concept, isn't it? There's an episode, and by episode I mean there's a book series or book television show. What was that? There was a thing done somewhat, several years ago, a couple decades ago actually, about Jack the Ripper in the exact same concept, where Jack the Ripper was traveling through time because someone went back in time to visit him, and Jack the Ripper was, again, better than the person from the future, and so was able to overpower him and take his technology. And it's also an interesting concept because the base premise is the idea that technology is a tool, because it is. Although actually technology, by base definition, is just the application of human innovation, but you get the idea. So anyone from the past who has sufficient time and means and intellect and skill and will and all that fun stuff can theoretically use that tool just as well as the person can from the future, if not better. It is also worth noting that someone from the past might be more motivated to do so because this technology seems amazing and astounding and, oh my god, the things I could accomplish with this. Whereas to the person in the present, or the future or whatever, it's mundane to them. It's every day to them. They take it for granted. So I like that concept of Sterling being someone who sees the potential of all this technology, of this time travel, of this teleportation, of computer chips and all this horrible stuff, and then sees the potential to use that to expand and grow and to change the future. It is worth noting, although we'll talk about this more in episode 2, I keep saying that Sterling is basically egomaniacal. He genuinely thinks that he is changing the world, that he is the one who will usher us into a new path, that kind of a thing, right? And yet, how many people would have that kind of mentality in the more modern eras of Star Trek? How many people would say, to look at the technology they have at that time, to do incredible, amazing things, and would think, I'm going to change the path of our people? It wouldn't occur to so many of them because it's so normal and so mundane. Even though, if I'm blunt, someone with sufficient knowledge, information, skill, willpower, motivation, could actually accomplish great things in the modern era, even though they no longer have that advantage, just because the technology itself is so useful. We actually see this in quite a bit of Star Trek, mostly in the TNG and the Deep Space Nine era. What people can accomplish despite having no real advantage, just because they had to will to see it through. Moving along. That being said, his mastery of the technology that he has spent decades learning is... There's no getting across this. I have to actually have this note down here. Forgive me for what's going to sound like a quote, but as just semicolon. If you don't get it, the gentleman playing Sterling types very rapidly. Kind of like this. You can probably hear this, because I have a good mic. He's always... there's several scenes where they show it. He's always typing straight on the home row. He is literally just mashing his fingers. I'm going to stop doing that. He's literally just mashing his fingers as hard as he can just on the home row and nothing else. And that's all he does. His mastery of that home row is amazing. Finally, nice cliffhanger. We've been spotted. He is better than us. We weren't prepared. We were arrogant. The Voyager crew was arrogant and wasn't prepared for the kind of threat he really was. And they should have been, let's be honest, but whatever. And so he now has the advantage. He's taken the Doctor. They've seen the ship. The ship is damaged. Da-da-da! Good cliffhanger. And I'm looking forward to the next episode, which I'll see you next week.